So I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker for Sisters United. It's Dr. Hannah Scott. Dr. Scott is a full professor and founding member of Ontario Tech University in Oshawa. She is in the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities. She received her PhD in sociology from the University of Alberta, and she has worked in the United States and Canada on several interagency initiatives. She was the founding director of the Center for Evaluation and Survey Research at UOIT. She's also served as president of her faculty association and grievance officer. Her current interests lie in the areas of victimology, workplace victimization, homicide studies, evaluation, gender studies, and victimization patterns in public versus private spaces. If you want more information about that, it can be found on the university website. I first met Dr. Scott when she attended and did a presentation at the Durham Labour Council many years ago, and I've heard her speak a number of times since then. I'm sure you'll gain a lot of information from her presentation, so please join me in welcoming Dr. Scott.
Okay, so I'm a pacer, so I'm going to take the walk-in mic. For those of you who have to teach and do public presentations, we all find our way, right? So in my case, it's talking and walking. So I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement before we begin. So Ontario Tech University acknowledges the lands and people of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. We are thankful to be welcomed on these lands in friendship. The lands we are situated on are covered by under the Williams Treaties and the traditional territory of the Mississauga, a branch of the Anishinaabe Nation, including Algonquin, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi. These lands remain home to a number of Indigenous nations and people. We acknowledge this land out of respect for Indigenous nations who have cared for Turtle Island, also called North America, from before the arrival of settler peoples until this day. Most importantly, we remember the history of these lands has been tainted by poor treatment of and lack of friendship with First Nations who call them home. However, this history is something that we are all affected by, and we are all treaty people in Canada. We all have shared history to reflect on, and each of us is affected in this history in different ways. Our past defines our present, but if we move forward as friends and allies, then it does not have to define our future. So we can reflect on that, and there's a lot of wisdom in these words because this talk today is about bullying and poor treatment of people. And so starting off on the correct foot, as many Indigenous cultures say, with an acknowledgement, I think is the way to start our talk. So this was a project. Thank you for the Durham Region Labour Council. They were absolutely instrumental in starting this project. The wheel, which we're going to talk about, is a tool in your toolbox. So I've been listening to some of these talks. I came in just before noon. And so a lot of the things that I'm hearing, this is going to help a lot of people. So if you have been discriminated against for whatever reason, if you are being bullied at work for whatever reason, this is going to help. And I created it because I was a grievance officer and I was seeing this, but also I've been bullied. And I think I'm not alone in the fact that about half of the people in this room have probably been bullied or more. And as union people, we all know you've got that helper gene in you. So you're here to help others because you've seen this kind of thing. So I have a question to start this off. When you last saw a bullying incident, could be yours, could be somebody at work, in a workplace situation, what did it look like? What did you see? What kind of behaviors? Yeah. Well, you don't have to use the mic, just shout it out.
It was covert, it was not obvious, it was not direct, and it was a hidden message.
So what did it look like? What did you see that made you think that?
It feels, you feel it
Oh,
in
you
your
feel
body.
it. Yeah,
It's
okay.
something that doesn't sit right. It's cringe. That's the
Yeah,
word.
cringe. So you're like, ooh, I know it when I see it, right? That's one of the things, but we're having trouble defining it, right? So what we're going to talk about today, so I built this wheel in 2018 as a concept paper, and it's since been adjusted a little bit, and there's some copies over here on paper, but there's also a QR code that's going to be up here for the electronic folks. But we're going to go through it and talk about how you can use it. It's sort of gone international at this point, so many of you have already seen it, but some of you have not, and this is going to be useful. Take a pile for people, spread them around if you want, for paper people. I know I stare at screens all day long, and a piece of paper is such a welcome thing. So, let's start with a few definitions. Because when I give these talks, when I've done podcasts and things like that, oftentimes I get somebody who says, well, you don't understand. Sometimes you just have bad employees, right? We have to be able to get rid of bad employees. And sometimes they're quite hostile in their language. And there are certain things that will delineate between what is bullying and what is not bullying. And the closer you move away from this definition, the harder it is to identify. But it does mean harassing, and we're going to go back to this where the employer really does like the word harassment a lot. Harassment, offending, socially excluding someone, or negatively affecting someone's work tasks. It's a very general definition I've chosen here. Go home to your policies at your workplaces, see what their definition of bullying is, or whether or not it's actually included, or whether or not they're using only the word harassment, which is a very different word, and it's much harder to prove. It has to be, it can't be a one-off incident. It has to be repeated and fairly regular. And so current labor laws, when I last looked, said that basically to keep a file open with the labor under the labor code, you have to have one incident a year to keep that file open. When I read that, I thought, wow, it just blew my mind. It says this is really hard to prove because people are having trouble finding one incident a year to keep this file open. This is an exceptional thing to me. When we talk to individuals who are being bullied, they say, it's something that happens, I can't explain it, I know it when I see it, it's every day. It affects my life. I'm throwing up. I have heart palpitations. I don't want to go into work anymore. I'm afraid of people or individuals. And so this is a daily thing that happens, but yet we still have this provision that only one thing a year has to be documented to keep a file open with the labor board. And here's the other thing that most people sort of overlook. A lot of times it is escalating. So if you're asking yourself, is this bullying? Is this happening to me? Ever popular question, am I crazy, right? This is the first question anybody should be asking themselves. Am I crazy? Am I oversensitive, right? Because we're meant to feel this way, we're self-critical. But if you notice it's escalating, started with one thing, then it's a few more things, then it's more often, it starts to increase in frequency, or intensity, right? Or persistency. That's when you know maybe you might have something here. It's not a one-off thing. And while I'm saying this is also the argument you make to your employer. Okay, so all you grievance officers out there, I was a grievance officer. You have to tell people they have to, the target of bullying has to do all the legwork. So I'm just gonna set my timer here. I can get my phone to work. It feels like I've lost. There we go. Just want to make sure I don't go over time. So when you're advising individuals who are going through this experience and say, I think I'm being bullied, or whether or not you think you're being bullied, or whether or not you have a friend who thinks they're being bullied, when you ask them certain questions like, how does it start? And you're going to show them the wheel, and it'll help them understand what's been going on. Because what I did when I first started testing this was I took it to people as I was building it who I knew were being bullied. And I said, so what's going on? And they would say, well, my boss is just an a-hole, right? They are constantly, I feel like they're always talking about me behind my back, but I can't prove that. They call me out at meetings sometimes, they seem to be hypercritical, and then I give them the wheel. And then they see all of the other things that their boss is doing. So what this is going to do is going to, at least from what I've been hearing, is it's going to bring a sense of calm because you're going to understand what you're seeing. One of the things that bullies do is that they try to keep you off balance. And the theory that this is based on, it says exactly that the abuser wants to make sure that you're not sure what's going on all the time, that they're not sure what's coming next. And this is going to help a lot of people figure out what's happening, and it brings calm. It's also going to give you the ability to name it. And that's the biggest problem, right? You ask people what's going on, they're like, well, I don't know, is this bullying? Is this bullying? So, we heard the word covert already, right? The idea of covert bullying versus overt bullying. The employer likes to use the word harassment, so most of you are going to have harassment policies at work. I have tried in my own workplace to get them to use the word bullying. They don't like the word bullying. The legal people get a hold of it. And I do this for a living. And I'm the expert, and they won't put it on. Because they have their own reasons. They always give certain things that that harassment is more easily defined and so on. Bullying is not really defined, and they're absolutely correct. But it also is more convenient for the employer because harassment is a very high legal bar to achieve. And usually it involves overt bullying, right? As the target, your target is going to have to, or you are, and you already know this, you're going to have to walk around, collect all the information for your employer, document their cases. You're going to get a binder of information. You're going to hand it over to your union rep. You're going to hand it to your employer, however that works. And then they're going to sift through it, decide what they want to take, criticize it, try to get the binder thinned, if you want to think about it that way, get the evidence put aside. And the standard they're going to use is the harassment standard. So what they want is a paper trail. They want witnesses. They want evidence, right? Is your bully, well, they actually will. I'm not going to say that. Most of the time, your bully will not put anything in an email, right? They're going to take you aside. There's going to be a lot of unofficial discussions, right? So-and-so, I notice you're not performing well at work, right? So, and then the ever popular tactic, so-and-so is doing really well. How come you're not performing well, right? They guise it as performance evaluation, but it's unofficial, it's taken aside, nothing's in writing, right? And so it becomes, it's like, is this bullying? I think it's bullying, but what is it? So there's usually no witnesses. There's usually no paper trail. Most of it happens in an overt setting. So we're going to talk a little bit about, there we go. I want to give you an example. This came from the research that we were doing. And I'm going to get you to think about these statements. So this statement, I've been blamed for things I did not do. Bullying? Well, you could see an employer maybe making a mistake. Certainly the employer's going to say that, well, this was just an oversight. I was not paid for our morning meetings and breaks, right? So you have to meet beforehand. You don't get paid for your breaks. If you take time off, you get that time docked. Is that bullying? Is that I'm not sure. I was threatened to have my job replaced by someone else. That's pretty harsh, right? Yeah, that's bullying. And most people would say, you know, if they're at that stage, why is your boss, there's other ways to be doing this. I was told that because I had health issues that I was lucky that I still have my job and that someone would probably not hire me. That's cold. It's cold, but it's also something that's one of those conversations that happens quietly, that no one ever sees, that you as the target will document if you hear such words, but there's nobody going to be around to corroborate, right? And harassment, under legal terms, really has a very high bar. Like, you can say these things, but then it comes down to witness credibility, right? It's you as the target saying, there's a problem. My boss was controlling. Well, a lot of bosses are controlling. It's actually a management style. My boss sent philosophy questions by text in the morning and on my personal time, and one day I didn't respond, and he yelled at me saying if I didn't respond the next time, that I would be considered terminated. Weird. Just gonna, very odd. But yeah, that's a bit concerning. Is it harassment? Is it bullying? It's probably bullying, but then harassment, you know, if you say, well, I don't know. We start to get to challenges. How about any of these? I was under full camera. He would watch me from the time in the computer monitor. I could see, he could see and hear every move I made. Well, that's not uncommon. There's a lot of places that are under workplace surveillance, a lot of retail spaces and so on. If they're not normally around and they install a camera, weird. He would not allow me to take time off for my daughter's surgeries. He said I was not being a team player if I took work off, and that my mom was retired and could take my daughter for surgery, right? Delegating your family's work responsibilities, right? So that you can come home, or come to work, sorry. I was not allowed to sit down working at the desk 8 to 10 hours a shift I was working. I had to stay busy at all times. You see this a lot in restaurant situations, in a lot of retail situations. They want you up and moving and constantly looking busy. So, you know, it depends on the work and play environment. If your job is normally a desk job and they don't let you sit down, weird. So context is important. He would say sexual things to me in front of other employees, saying if one of our clients were not happy, that I would take care of them on my knees. Harassment, yes. Yeah. So, and then this one. He always had a bowel movement. The word SIC here is Latin. It's a term to say this was, because these are their own words typed in, so I don't change them. He always had a bowel movement, and the bathroom was beside my workstation. And in this case, he had moved her to that station. And he said he went and pinched one off for me to smell. These are things that people experience, folks. Horrifying. But here's the thing. This is one person. That's one person. I just broke up their statement. So when we ask ourselves, and the reason why I went through this example is that we question these individual things, and employers will actually break these things down. But when you see this, the picture is pretty clear, right? And so what the wheel's going to allow you to do is to break this down and show the pattern when you have these stories. So your story or the stories that you're hearing from others can be broken down and assisted by the tool. Yeah.
This may not be the right approach to that, but when I see those things, like especially the one where you pitched off the rope so you can smell it, one of the things that I would do is do it back to that. Or like when you say like the surgery thing about the kids, I'd be like, well, you can go pick them up. You go pick them up then. Or like, I don't know if that's the right approach.
That's not appropriate. Well, no, and the interesting thing is who's in the power dynamic. Some people are confident and can do those kinds of things, some people can't, but if you do them, if the employer is in a position of privilege, then suddenly you're not acting appropriately, and it adds to the fact that you're being bullied, and there's reason why you're being bullied, because you're a bad employee. And sometimes you just have to get rid of bad employees, right? That's what the manager is saying, right? See, you've got an attitude problem. And so, you know, you're left without a lot of tools in your toolbox, right? So this is going to actually be one that you can use. So yeah, this is a QR code for the wheel itself, so you can get an electronic version of this. And I'm going to go through each piece of this wheel as we go through. But I want to sort of acknowledge that it has 8 spokes. there's a motivation component, which is power and control by the offender, and there's a history to that. And it is supporting other acts that are, the wheel is actually being reinforced by sexual and physical abuse, even though we don't see it specifically. So let's start around the top. We're going to go clockwise. The QR code will show up again at the end. So number one complaint, one of the most common was this one and the next one. Using intimidation, I think we all understand. And for those of you who can't see the sign here, it says making workers feel uncomfortable or afraid by using looks, actions, gestures, smashing things, destroying property. So for those of you, this might sound familiar. What does this sound like to you? What kind of other situations have we seen? Smashing property, calling names, domestic violence. This is directly taken from a domestic violence wheel. It's just been accommodated to the workplace. And people, when I first started doing this, thought, that's a little severe. Why are you doing that? And it's because I am a victimologist and a criminologist by training. I don't come at this from the labor standpoint. I come at this from a criminology standpoint. I am a sociologist with a psychology degree by training, but I am a criminologist and a victimologist by practice. And I used to counsel domestic violence victims. That's where I learned about this wheel. And I was talking about this to my class and talking about the West Street mine disaster. A man named Sean Cornish wrote up about what had happened in the West Street mine disaster in Pictou, Nova Scotia. It's, I think, now 25 years ago. 29 miners died, but he documented what he saw in the workplace prior to this happening. And I had just given a talk on the wheel for intimate partner violence, and then I'd given this talk about the West Street mine disaster. And a lot of what he said was going on in the West Street mine disaster was happened on the wheel that we had just seen the week before. And I started going, bing, 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 bing. Oh no, maybe this will pan out. And so this is the end result. So abuse is abuse is abuse. This is not a woman thing. This is not a child thing. We understand that abusers they work in different environments. They're not just at home. They're also in the workplace. And this works in a very appropriate way. So employers do make you feel bad. We now know that an abuser can control someone, because we know about intimate partner violence. You can control a person by staring at them across the room. And we understand that in the case of intimate partner violence. We understand that I can use a word, if I'm the abuser, to my victim, and it's a very intimate relationship. We could be at a party, and I could say that word, and I could make my target cower if I'm successful at my abuse. We see this going on in the workplace. We hear people saying these same things. He said such and such, or she said such and such, and I knew I was fired by the end of the day, right? Because they can control. The idea is power and control, and we'll get through that. So workers feeling uncomfortable or afraid, using looks, actions, gestures, smashing things, destroying property. Sometimes they'll just break things or rip up reports. Things like that get you to start again. Dismiss the work, and then just say, you'll have to do it over again. Using emotional abuse, I think most of us understand this one. Putting workers down, making workers feel bad about themselves. Name calling, making workers think they are crazy, ever popular. That's very popular, being gaslighted. A lot of people talk about this feeling. Playing mind games, humiliating workers, making workers feel guilty, right? So all of these kinds of things are tactics used to get people to increase productivity. So on the management side of this, bullying is actually a leadership style. They don't call it bullying, but they call it how to motivate your workers. And sometimes you're motivating them this way, right? Well, but humiliating them, you've seen that at other workplaces. And the reason why Solidarity Forever, that song, that was all about worker humiliation. That's what it was that created that song, and you can see why this is happening. Isolation. This is the one that people's eyes light up when you give them the wheel, and they're trying to explain what's going on. And they know it's going on, but they can't document it, right? They just know they're being left out of conversations. They know that they're not being talked to. They know that when they go into work every morning and they say good morning, maybe the boss says good morning to everybody else, but not that one person. And they do it in front of everyone else. So it's not just not a good morning. It's, hey, everybody, I'm not going to say good morning to person X over there. So that's sending a signal, isn't it, right? And human beings sometimes being what they are, some people are saying, well, I really want to be on the boss's good side, so I'm not going to say good morning to X anymore. Soon, a lot of people aren't saying good morning to X anymore, right? So I will tell you, there's a good news story. You can use all these tactics, by the way. You can think about how they can be used in reverse. Once you know what they are, I don't want to bring you all down. You can think about, this is like witchcraft here. You're going to be able to take it and kind of turn it on your boss, because somebody in this study, when I talked to them about the wheel and I showed it to them, they were one of these people that their boss wouldn't talk to them. And so they decided to try to change their behavior. And they said, well, I'm going to just go into my job. I'm going to say good morning to my boss every day. Right? Just try to show them I'm a team player. And the boss would not say good morning. But they saw the wheel, and they documented it. And the next day, they went into work, and they said, good morning, boss. Boss didn't say anything, and they documented it. You could document 30 not good mornings in a month. And that's bullying. It's that easy. You can name it and you can document it. One morning, though, to give you a similarity of how this really works with the similar relationships with intimate partner violence, the bully said good morning to them. And they called me. I said, oh my God, the bully said good morning. My boss said good morning. I said, oh, wow, what do you think brought that on? They said, I don't know. Maybe they're changing, right? The hopefulness. Maybe they've seen the errors of their ways. And my head is going, well, if intimate partner violence is right and the nature of abusers are right and power control abusers are right, I don't think that's what's happening. I didn't say anything. I said, good for you. It kept them up for a couple of days. They finally called me back and said, I finally realized why they're not saying good morning. Or why they said good morning to me that day. And I said, what? And he said, well, I was with another coworker. And I was like, okay. And he said, yeah, and the coworker said, well, your boss seems really nice. And their response was, they do, don't they? Like, really understanding what's going on here. But it was because bullies manage their own identities, too. So they're going to do things on other axioms, right? They're going to be doing things to impress their own management situation, right? So they're going to want to look good in front of other employees. They're often really good to staff if they're bullying other groups of people, right? It's important for them to not look bad to everybody, right? And we know this in intimate partner violence. One of the things I say in my class is that the person who abuses their partner often is a really good neighbor. They're not these terrible people. They mow the lawn, they shovel the walk of their neighbors. Because when something bad happens, the neighbors are like, well, they're such a nice person. Who would have thought, right? Because they want them to dismiss behavior, right? If they're hearing yelling and screaming, they're just having a domestic argument. Nothing's really wrong going on over there. And so by doing that, it gets you, because most of us believe in the goodness of people. We're like, no, that can't be happening. That person seems so nice. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. I think some of us already seen this. We really saw this in the case of Pictou, Nova Scotia, in the mine disaster. Prior to that, workers were being hurt. They were threatened with termination if they went to go get help, or or sought medical help during the shift. They had to wait, right? And this is like head injuries, things falling on their head, exposure to toxic gas, right? Methane, and passing out. They would just say, nope, suck it up. You can deal with it after your shift. And by the way, if you don't come in tomorrow, you might lose your job. So they're minimizing the pain that people are going through. And so we see that. So it says making light of abuse and not taking concerns about it seriously, denying the abuse happened, shifting responsibility of harm to the workers, right? It's worker responsibility, worker safety. It's not the employer. And blaming workers for the abuse, right? So I think we've seen a lot of this. And again, it might be worker responsibility. It could be. But if it's accommodated with all these other things, maybe it's not. Next, using others. I put a little more words here because this is my latest project. This is making my union very happy because it explains and it takes away M2M issues, right? So member-to-member issues, for those of you grievance officers, whoop, aren't they just the best? You have to create the firewall, and right? There are things that we have long discussions over trying to handle to make sure that if one member is harassing another member, that we represent both of them as union people. However, if you report it to your manager or your superior and they do nothing because they said they're using coworkers, then your issue is with management. It's no longer an M2M, and you can manage it. So what this is and what it says here is threatening layoffs or closures, using coworkers to relay messages from management to targets, or from coworker to coworker in some cases, not responding to mobbing complaints, big one, not addressing client, customer, coworker harm to targets. So we understand with this that it can be, or using others is what this has been changed to. It used to say using coworkers. I've changed it to using others because we know that it can, in the service industry, it can come from clients and the manager does nothing about it. In the hospital industry, it can come from patients because they're assigned to the violent patients if they're not coming on board. And so they get a night of abuse when everybody else, usually in the health industry, for those of you who don't know, if there are abusive patients, usually they get spread out amongst the service people. But if all of them end up on your shift, you know what, somebody doesn't like you, right? Because you're getting all of them. And it's going to be a really hard night for you. So this one is really interesting because it extends the reach of the bully. So what they're doing here, when they do not address it, if you say, so in my academic setting, when someone comes to a faculty member and says, my students are bullying me, right? They can show emails, they're speaking inappropriately. It does happen on occasion, not very often, but it does happen. If management does nothing, then the management has weaponized the students against the member, right? Likewise, if you're in your own workplace and you say, X has targeted me, is bullying me, if management doesn't take care of it, what they're saying is to X is, keep going. We don't like this person. It has the same effect of not saying good morning in front of a whole bunch of coworkers. And you could use these things simultaneously. So in the case of using isolation, not saying good morning in front of other people, they're using the coworkers to reinforce this. Because the coworkers will then sort of shift on sides sometimes and then isolate somebody because they also are concerned about their job, right? So coworkers will willingly or unwillingly sometimes become the extension of the bully. Using employer privilege, I think we heard about performance, right? Performance reviews. I had somebody who was going through performance improvement plans, PIPs. I'm like, oh, you are so going to be fired. They very rarely work in your favor because what they do is they tell you everything that's wrong and then you have to fix it all, and it just gives them cause to be able to let you go. It took a while. They said, no, I'm really trying very hard, right? I'm going to do really well. And they were let go. And she said, I should have listened. It was actually a good thing that happened. She got a better job, right? She'd been beaten down so much that she didn't think anybody would actually ever hire her. But she's gone on to get a much better job. This is not something that should be a normal workplace thing. So treating targets like servants, making decisions without proper input, being authoritarian, writing unmerited poor performance reviews, creating unfair or inequitable working conditions. These are all things on this wheel. These are examples. They're not, bullies are very resourceful. It's the best word I can think of it. They will use, and they're creative. Oh my goodness, they're so creative. So they'll use the tools that they have in their toolbox. So these are just meant to be illustrations to get you thinking about it, but I think you can think of other things that might have been happening here in your own situations. Using economic abuse. Now, as we go around this wheel, I'm going to say that as we move around the wheel, we're kind of moving from more covert behaviors, which the majority of people experience, to more overt behaviors, which less people experience. Using economic abuse creates a paper trail. You don't pay someone, it's kind of hard to hide, right? However, when you ask people to come in and not get paid for your break, then you have a little bit more of a paper, or a little less of a paper trail if you other than your check just being withheld. But it creates an evidence trail. So this is rarely ever used. But we do see it in terms of forced volunteer work, right? If you're gonna be part of the team, you have to run for some cause, right? Or walk for some cause, or bake for some cause, or whatever you need to do. So that's extra labor they get out of you to profit the organization. And they kind of make it mandatory. And then at the top of the wheel here, using coercion threats. Very risky, right? That's why when they tell you that your job might be at risk, it's because, and they take you aside to do it. They don't want witnesses, right? Once they say witnesses, that's actually a problem. However, a lot of coworkers are not going to necessarily support, even if they do see it, because you've seen some of this. It's hard to, when you're worried about the bully is still often at work, and sometimes you just don't need that aggravation. You don't want to be the next target. And I would challenge you to think about if you were ever bullied on a schoolyard and they told you to just walk away or tell the teacher, right? How many ever told the teacher? Like, what's the concern about telling the teacher? Tattletale, right? Does it go away? Like, if you tell the teacher, does the bully stop? What happens? It gets worse, right? Because you told him, right? You're a snitch now. It's like, well, I'm being abused. Kind of. It's like this team player language, but it's not team player, right? One person's being bullied. So telling the boss becomes a problem. And walking away doesn't work. And it's because the intimate partner violence wheel, the old wheel, that is still very effective, especially for naming abuse, they talk about this. This is the center. My students forget this all the time on tests. What is in the center of the wheel? It's the most important part. This is the motivation of the bully. The bully is looking for power and control. This is why it escalates, right? I want you to come into work on the weekend and finish this report. It's not going to, you should have gotten it done during the week. I'm not paying you for this, right? So you do. You think, okay, I'm just going to do it, get it over with, right? But then you notice there's more reports. Soon you're working every weekend. Sometimes more of your reports are being tossed. It doesn't work. So the pattern of escalation happens when you walk away or the problem's not addressed. So thinking about this, when you understand this, we also understand in intimate partner violence that the motivation provides entitlement. Hence, why the bully says, well, you don't understand. Sometimes they're just a bad worker, right? Now, not all of us are excellent workers. I'm not an excellent worker. I'm a good worker. I do my job. I'm an average worker, I would say, in my thing. I'm not a superstar. We got some superstars at our university. But they try to motivate us to all be superstars. I'm like, that just cannot happen. That doesn't even make any sense. You need people who are just going to do their job every day for a while, while they're there. Interestingly enough, though, the power control person is always, no matter what you do, they say they're talking about motivation, but in fact, they may not be, right? Especially if they are choosing someone and making their tasks progressively more difficult. You see them being called out in meetings more often, or they are coming to you with those complaints and saying they're being brought out to meetings more, or called out in meetings more often. They're being publicly criticized more often. And so what happens is, when the problem is not addressed, we use the situation, we start moving into that toxic, we always use the toxic workplace environment kind of situation. But one incident of correction made with good faith to get someone on the right track, because you want to support them, you want them to continue to work there, right? It's a different set of motivations. That's acute correction. That's an acute situation. Chronic bullying, where it's ongoing and widespread, such in the case of hospitals. We see that a lot in hospitals, and we're actually now starting to see it. Somebody did a study looking at it in nursing schools, and they're seeing bullying happening inside the nursing school as part of the training so that you can be adjusted to it when you're in the hospital. Be kind to your people in hospitals is all I'm saying. If you go to a hospital, wow, there's stuff going on there you don't even know. But we have to think about it in terms of persistence, right? How long is this happening? You can be corrected at work. Your employer can do that, absolutely. Can they do it through other people? Can they ask other people to assign you tasks who are on your situation, right? Using others, right? So if you and Buddy are both on the same job and then suddenly Buddy's telling you that you have to stay late because you and the boss are going out for drinks, that's a problem. You're being isolated. They're using coworkers. They're putting you in a pecking order. And it's something that you know is a next level, right? You sort of suspected you're being bullied. Now you're starting to see a little more, a little more, a little more. So we have to be careful about that. So if appropriate policies and measures are in place, then bullying can be shorter term, right? It does happen in workplaces. It has to be addressed. Good, healthy workplaces figure it out, get some policies in place, and do something about it. Inoculating yourself against the bully when you see them is actually the best measure. The theory actually says this is the appropriate set of action. Letting it go or ignoring it and letting it be unchecked is more of a problem. This is what creates that more toxic work environment. So where there are no resources or willpower to make this change, then bullying can become chronic as a mode of leadership. And that's another paper I'm working on. Bullies also mentor. So one of the things we're hearing now is that they said, well, we got rid of the bully, right? Because that's what you think you want to do. Get rid of the bully. So you get rid of the bully. You're successful. They've actually been in management now, though, for 10 years or 5 years. You know they have brought people along and trained them because they're managers, right? So you get rid of the bully, but the people they trained are still there. It may lessen the impact of what's going on, but it doesn't necessarily make it go away because some of those same methods of management are still happening unless they address the problem, right? They need to inoculate it, maybe bring in the workplace bully wheel, have a discussion, on board with it, whatever. The last slide here is about physical and sexual abuse. Extremely risky, very rare in the study. It was only about 3 to 6% of people, depending on gender. Surprise, surprise. But why I have this slide here, it's the full wheel. So you see the power and control in the center. You see the 8 spokes of the wheel in the thing. But outside is physical and sexual abuse. How this works is that all of these little spokes in here work to reinforce the potential for physical and sexual abuse. And in the workplace, that looks like physical harm, sexual harm. One of the things that is stated in the threats is sexual innuendo. When I first put sexual abuse in here, people are like, well, that doesn't happen at work. And I'm like, oh no? Anybody who's worked in a bar understands it wholeheartedly. It's part of the job for women and men. So what happens is, and this is what we found, and this is where the wheel and the intimate partner violence victims really sort of come together. When they designed the first wheel, they asked the people who were doing these focus groups in the 90s, you have a chance to talk to lawyers and judges about what it's like to be abused. What do you want them to know? And they said, you know, this is really callous, but if it was just about being hit, I could take that. That's a one-time thing. It's the day-to-day, walking on eggshells, wondering what they're going to do next, feeling like I was going to be crazy. I didn't do that. My battery is running low. Thank you. So it's a day-to-day abuse. So what they do is that the abuser uses these inside things, this use of intimidation, isolation, crazy making, using other people, not saying good morning, all of those things, because they know that you're worried that as it starts to escalate, physical and sexual abuse might actually be on the table, right? Physical harm in your job. You might get the crap job In construction, you get the dangerous work. In the mining job in the Westry mine, they were sent down with machines that didn't have internal combustion or had not sealed engines, right? So the engine was exposed into methane, right? Methane pools. And so that's what happened. It blew up, right? So they weren't using the right equipment. People who had to operate and go get those things would be like really dizzy operating these machines. You could see where things would go wrong. So it is very rare and very overt. And so this one we all agree is wrong at work. We get this, but even then there's still a contentious issue about whether or not this really happened. You spend a lot of time arguing about that. There we go. So the implications. I like to talk about this wheel in a different way. If I couldn't find a proper graphic to put the bullying on top. This is the only one that worked in Microsoft Word. But it's trying to tell you, because I made this a couple of days ago, bullying is really the umbrella term here. It includes things like harassment, workplace violence, but also that toxicity covert thing that you experience every day, right? So when you're hearing the stories of bullies, when you're telling the story of your own experience, use the wheel. So what we do in intimate partner violence situations, when we counseled, was we'd ask them their story. We'd ask victims their story, we document it, and then we go again and say, and we go through on a separate day and we give them the wheel and say, let's talk about that story again. And then they would have that aha moment. Oh my God, they did this. They did this. Oh, yes, they did this. They wouldn't come home for days. I'd have to worry about the eggshells, all of these kind of things. When you do this with workers, they also see it. They're like, oh my God, I said good morning every single morning, and they would never say anything. I wish I'd known, I would have written that down now, right? Because they can see it. But it also creates that toxicity in work environment, right? Because if you have somebody who's really making life miserable for people, it's important. So the word harassment, which most people have in their workplace policies around this, is a bit of catch-22, but you can still use the wheel in those situations. Because the pattern of abuse, remember that was all one person, those comments, that does make up a pattern of harassment, right? So we call it the bully wheel, that's what it was originally called, but now it's called the workplace power control wheel, right? Because it's not just about bullying, you can use it to document harassment as well. And on a lighter note, just quickly, what works? I've got 2 minutes before this thing's gonna go off, that's okay. So, I talked about the hear no evil, see no evil, right? Ignore it, go away. This is the common response by other coworkers. We know that doesn't work. It actually empowers the bully if we assume that the motivation is power control. So the opposite of that is see it. Here, if you see it, say it, right? We were talking about that, I heard that earlier today, right? Point. There's a lot of campaigns when we tell kids, what do you do in a schoolyard if you see something that's not going right? You can point, right? And the modern day version, the adult version of this is get your camera out, right? And just document it and then send it to the person. You can do that, right? It doesn't even have to be identified. You've got documentation. You don't necessarily, if you're worried about being disclosed, at least somebody knows you were seen and heard. It gives them something. Shout it from the rooftops, that's the bullhorn. Pink Shirt Day, good example in schools. We know that this works. Why isn't it in everybody's workplace, right? Why can't we do that, right? So have those public sports, change the culture, right? So however that's done, Pink Shirt Day is a really good example. I just say make it for everybody. The door opening, right? That's from a documentary. I don't know if you remember, there was a kid being bullied. It was a great documentary about a kid who was being bullied, and he just started opening doors for people at school. And he became this guy. He was the door opening guy. And everybody really liked him. But he did it at his second school. He couldn't do it at his first school. It was too bad. He was trying to figure out, they removed him from that school, put him in another school, but he started doing that. Stop. Okay. Talk to someone is the last one there. And then I've talked about that pink boot is supposed to be giving the boot, right? Get rid of the bully. That's a great idea of getting the bully. But again, if they've been there for years, you've got a bigger problem than just one person, because other people embolden that bully. They've been allowed to operate for 5, 10 years, right? So who did they mentor? Maybe they need retraining. Get rid of the bully, but maybe retrain the people around them. And we don't have that process, by the way. I think we call it sensitivity training and all that stuff. It doesn't work that way. Nobody wants to go to bully school or anti-bully school. Jobs don't have that office. It doesn't exist. So we need to find something that managers would actually want to take that would be called something else. But it would still be anti-bully school. I'm just... call it a retreat. But then make sure that you actually just leave the building. In universities, we do retreats right in the classroom. I'm like, how is this a retreat? And then the last one is this other wheel, which is the equality wheel. And I haven't built it yet. But this is my new thing. So this is my first shot at it. It's built on the equality wheel that exists in intimate partner violence when you're talking to people about how to choose healthy relationships. Like, what are you looking for? Are you looking for mutual respect? All of these things. I've tried this. It still has to be tested. But it's a starting point, right? This is how you change the culture. This is what you look for in your work relationships, right? It's based on principles of equality. Although there is a hierarchy in the workplace, so that's why this might not work so well. But I'm working it through. But I mean, that's a good place to sort of think about what to do next. So thank you, Beth. Those are my stories.